Before they became nightmares cloaked in shadow, the Ringwraiths were kings, noble, revered, and mighty. Each ruled with ambition and vision. Their names once spoken with reverence across the scattered realms of Middle-earth. But greatness, unchecked, often carries a fatal flaw, the hunger for more. And Sauron, master of deceit, knew this too well. With gilded promises and rings glittering with dark enchantment, he offered power beyond mortal comprehension. They accepted, and in doing so, sealed their doom. The transformation did not come swiftly. It crept like a disease, warping their wills, hollowing their hearts, until their very forms faded into the unseen. Kingdoms fell, thrones turned to dust. The men who once shaped history became slaves to a darker will. Their eyes no longer saw the world of light. They saw only the will of the ring. Yet behind every hooded gaze, behind every inhuman shriek, there lingered a shadow of the man who once was, a flicker of the ruler lost in the mire of corruption. The tragedy of the Nazgûl lies not only in their terror, but in their origins. They were not born monsters, they were made. And the fall of each one was a silent scream etched into the very bones of Middle-earth. The 9 rings were not gifts. They were cages disguised in gold and cloaked in promise. To the proud kings of men, they glittered with seduction, power unending, dominion unchecked, the chance to carve their names across eternity. But beneath that allure pulsed a darker truth. Each ring was a leash forged in the fires of deception, linking its bearer to the will of Sauron and the fate of the One Ring. The descent was not immediate. At first, the kings thrived, stronger, ageless, revered. Their people praised them. Their enemies feared them. But soon, shadows lengthened behind their eyes. Joy turned to obsession, peace to paranoia. Slowly, they slipped from the world of the living, their bodies fading like smoke, their souls enslaved to the Dark Lord's design. The rings did not just extend life, they unraveled it, thread by thread, until only the wraith remained. Their identities dissolved, their names lost to history. What remained were cloaks, crowns, and silence, vessels for Sauron's command. And yet, even in this spectral form, traces of the men endured. Regrets buried beneath layers of darkness, memories warped but not fully erased. The 9 were not simply monsters born of evil. They were victims of ambition, manipulated by a master of lies. Bound eternally to the One Ring, they became reflections of what awaits those who reach for power without foresight. Their tragedy is not just that they became wraiths, but that they were once men who believed they were seizing greatness and instead lost themselves. Once their transformation was complete, the Nazgûl were no longer kings. They were shadows given form, wraiths twisted beyond recognition, cloaked in malice, and driven by an eternal hunger for the ring. They became Sauron's most feared instruments, the 9 fingers of his will reaching into the hearts of men. To see one was to feel your courage bleed away. To hear one was to know despair. These were not mere ghosts. They were terror incarnate. They could not be reasoned with. They could not be slain by conventional means. Wherever they rode, the air grew cold and the sky seemed to dim. And yet, what made them truly terrifying was not their power, but their emptiness. Beneath their black cloaks, there was no face, only the memory of one. Their souls had been hollowed out, carved clean by centuries of servitude, leaving behind nothing but obedience and obsession. They were hunters, tireless and relentless, drawn to the ring like wolves to blood. But even in this horrific form, they bore the faintest remnants of their former selves, an echo of dignity long lost, a flicker of sorrow too deep to name. In Sauron's service, they gained immortality, but lost everything else. Their fate was not just a punishment. It was a living death, stretched thin across time, shackled to a power they could never command, only serve. And in that, they became the ultimate warning that the path to domination, when paved by darkness, always ends in silence, in servitude, and in shadow. When the Witch King fell upon the Pelennor Fields. It was more than the death of a wraith. It was the first crack in the Nazgûl's impenetrable veil of dread. His demise was foretold, yet no less shocking for it. Slain not by the might of kings or the cunning of warriors, but by a woman's defiance and a hobbit's courage, his end shattered the illusion of invincibility that cloaked the Ringwraiths. In that one moment, the terror that had long gripped the hearts of men faltered. The Nazgûl, once believed to be deathless, could bleed, could fall. The Witch King, their captain, the most powerful of the nine, was unmade in a single heartbeat, and through that rupture, doubt seeped in. Across the battlefield, and perhaps across the very fabric of the Wraith's existence. The echo of his scream lingered, not one of rage but of fear. With the Witch King gone, the nine were no longer a perfect circle of power. They were fractured, vulnerable. The loss of their leader sent tremors through their ranks, a sense, however faint, that their fate was not immune to change. And while the other 8 remained bound to Sauron's will, the knowledge that one of their own could fall planted a seed of instability. The fall of the Witch King was not just a blow to Sauron's army. It was a spiritual wound among the Ringwraiths, a silent herald of the end. Their dark dominion had been challenged, and the cracks in their armor, once invisible, had begun to show. When the One Ring was cast into the fires of Mount Doom, it was not just the end of Sauron. It was the unraveling of every shadow he had ever cast. For the Nazgûl, whose power and purpose were bound utterly to the ring, the destruction was catastrophic. In an instant, their anchor to existence was severed. No longer tethered to Sauron's will, they became wraiths without direction, purpose, or power. They were not slain by sword or flame, but by the collapse of the very magic that sustained them. As Barad-dûr crumbled and the eye of Sauron was extinguished, the Nazgûl were unmade, their essence scattered like ash in the wind. The fell beasts they rode screamed and plummeted from the sky, and the shadows that cloaked them peeled away like smoke. The moment was not a battle, it was an unbinding. One by one, the nine dissolved into the void, consumed by the same doom they had once helped to spread. And yet, in those final flickers of their existence, it's possible they felt something new, a hollow kind of silence where Sauron's voice had always roared. A weight lifted, a chain broken. Their destruction was complete, but in it, there may have been the briefest moment of freedom. Too late, too fleeting, but real. The Nazgûl did not simply vanish. They were undone, strand by strand, along with the dark will that had held them together for an age. And in that moment, the world breathed easier, as the One Ring perished and Sauron's power unraveled. Something strange stirred in the depths of the Nazgûl's fading spirits, memories. Long buried beneath centuries of darkness, flickers of forgotten lives began to rise. Echoes of voices once beloved, halls once ruled, battles fought not for domination but for justice. The shadows that had swallowed their identities trembled, and for the first time in an age, glimpses of who they once were returned. Brief, fragile, painful, but real. The king who had ruled a golden desert realm, the warrior lord of a northern stronghold, the wise ruler whose counsel brought peace to warring tribes. All of them had once been men, flawed, proud, ambitious, yes, but human. And now, in the moments before the void claimed them, those truths returned like a whisper in the dark. The burden of their choices weighed heavy. They had not merely fallen, they had surrendered, traded freedom for power, wisdom for control, and life for domination. And as Sauron's grip vanished, they saw the full cost. Not just what had been done to them, but what they had done to others. In those final heartbeats of spectral awareness, there was no roaring vengeance, no grasp for survival. There was only sorrow. Perhaps for the first time in countless years, they felt something resembling peace. Perhaps, in that flickering return to self, they tasted the bitter truth of their fall and the quiet, tragic grace of an ending no sword could deliver. They died not only as wraiths, but as men rediscovering what they had lost. When the ring was destroyed and Sauron fell, The Nazgûl did not meet death with fury, but with confusion. Their master's will, once the only thing guiding their existence, vanished like smoke in a windstorm, and with it went the order that had anchored their cursed eternity. They were left not defeated in battle, but abandoned by purpose. Drifting in the void between life and death, they were no longer servants, yet not fully themselves. The silence that followed was deafening. For centuries, they had heard Sauron's voice in every thought, every command, every heartbeat. Now, there was nothing. No voice, no hunger, just a vast emptiness. Some say they wandered the realms of shadow for a time, mindless and lost, no longer driven to hunt the ring, but unable to forget it. Restlessness consumed them. They had no form, no goal, no master, only fragments of memories and the hollow ache of power once possessed and now gone. Their very being had been sustained by domination and dread, and without those, what remained? Were they fading into non-existence, or simply unraveling like ghosts who had outlived their curse? In this liminal state, they were not wraiths, they were echoes. Echoes of ambition, of kingship, of ruin. Their fate was not a scream, but a slow disintegration, a quiet breaking of the bonds that held them together. The terror they had inspired was gone, but the tragedy lingered. For the Nazgûl were no longer fearsome lords of darkness. They were lost souls drifting in the wake of a fallen god. Their final moments were not marked by fire or thunder, but by an eerie, aching stillness. As the dark tower crumbled and the skies over Mordor split open, the Ringwraiths felt the threads of their cursed existence begin to unravel. It was not pain they felt, it was release. A strange and unexpected sensation, like air rushing into lungs that hadn't breathed in centuries. The force that had bound them, the will of Sauron, the pull of the ring, was gone. And for the first time since they had put on those fateful rings, they were truly alone in their own minds. What followed was not a cry of agony, but a strange, haunting harmony, a final symphony of souls unchained. One by one, they dissolved, not into nothing, but into something quieter, into the hush of memory. The black cloaks, the shrill cries, the shadows they cast, all vanished as if they had never been. Yet in their last flicker, a strange emotion stirred within them. It was not despair. It was joy, a faint, spectral joy, not born of triumph, but of finality. At long last, the torment had ended. The hunger, the chase, the shadow of a will not their own, it was all over. In death, they found the peace that eluded them in unlife. And so the Nazgûl passed, not as monsters screaming into the void, but as fading fragments of once great men, each whispering a silent farewell as they slipped into the unknown, free, at last, from the chains of the ring. Even as the canon closes the chapter on the Ringwraiths with their destruction, the shadow they cast lingers in the hearts of fans. The ambiguity of Tolkien's world leaves just enough space for wonder, for speculation, for the birth of whispered legends. Some believe that the Nazgûl did not simply vanish, but drifted into the farthest reaches of Middle-earth, in a haunted woods and nameless ruins, their presence felt in the cold wind. In the sudden hush of night, there are stories told in hushed voices of travelers glimpsing dark-robed figures on distant ridgelines, of dreams haunted by voices not quite human, echoing with regret and rage. Others imagine a more redemptive fate, that freed from Sauron's grip, the remnants of their ancient humanity stirred once more. Perhaps they sought to atone, wandering not to hunt but to heal. Perhaps they whispered forgotten names into the night, yearning to be remembered not as monsters, but as men. Such theories may never be proven, but that is part of the magic. Tolkien gave us not just history, but myth, tales that feel alive, evolving with each generation. The Nazgûl story, like so much in Middle-earth, stretches beyond the page. They were not just villains. They were warnings, tragedies, lost souls caught between power and oblivion. And though their cloaks turned to ash, their legacy remains. In every corner of the world Tolkien built, the question lingers: what becomes of a soul once it has forgotten its name? The Ringwraiths may be gone, but their shadow endures. Though the Nazgûl perished with the fall of Sauron, their legacy endures like a scar etched into the lore of Middle-earth. They were not merely villains, they were symbols, echoes of the terrible cost of unchecked ambition and corrupted power. The Nine began as kings, leaders revered by their people, but they became cautionary tales, monuments to the idea that even the greatest can fall. Their presence in Tolkien's legendarium is more than a plot device. It is a haunting reminder that power gained through deceit will always consume. Clad in shadow, faceless and voiceless, they became fear incarnate. They didn't just terrify armies, they paralyzed hope. And yet, that very fear is what makes them unforgettable. They have inspired countless dark lords, ghostly riders, and cursed knights in fantasy tales ever since. From their shrieking cries to the black steeds they rode, every element of the Nazgûl drips with iconic dread. They've become archetypes, foundations upon which a generation of fantasy writers have built their own wraiths and nightmares. Even outside Middle-earth, their silhouettes still ride. But perhaps what makes their story so lasting is its tragedy. The Nazgûl were not born in shadow. They were men who dreamed of greatness, who reached too far and were swallowed whole. In that, we see not just terror, but warning. Their legacy lies not in their swords, but in their silence. And though the ring has been destroyed, the path they walked, the temptation, the fall, the silence, still whispers through the dark corners of every tale told since. From noble kings to haunted wraiths, the journey of a Nazgûl is a tale of power, corruption, and the slow, silent unraveling of identity. Bound by rings they believed would grant them glory, they became slaves to darkness, feared and forgotten in equal measure. Their fall, their fading, and their final release mirror the deepest anxieties of Middle-earth. That even greatness can be consumed, that redemption may come too late, and that shadows often linger long after the fire is gone. Though they vanished with Sauron's fall, their legacy remains, a spectral echo that still chills the heart of every tale they touch.